श्रीगुरुभ्यो नमः। ॐ गुरुब्रह्मा गुरुर्विष्णुः गुरुर्देवो महेश्वरः गुरुः साक्षात् परब्रह्म तस्मै श्रीगुरवे नमः। गुरवे सर्वलोकानां भिषजे भवरोगिणां निधये सर्वविद्यानां श्रीदक्षिणामूर्तये नमः। वक्रतुण्डमहाकाय सूर्यकोटिसमप्रभ निर्विघ्नं कुरु मे देव सर्वकार्येषु सर्वदा। गजाननं भूतगणादिसेवितं कपिध्वजम्भोपरसारभक्षितम् उमासुतं शोकविनाशकारणं नमामि विघ्नेश्वरपादपङ्कजं। शुक्लाम्बरधरं विष्णुं शशिवर्णं चतुर्भुजं प्रसन्नवदनं ध्यायेत् सर्वविघ्नोपशान्तये। व्यासं वसिष्ठनप्तारं शक्ते पौत्रमकल्मषं पराशरात्मकं वन्दे शुकदातं तपोनिधिं। व्यासाय विष्णुरूपाय व्यासरूपाय विष्णवे नमो वै ब्रह्मनिधये वासिष्ठाय नमो नमः। नारायणं नमस्कृत्य नरं चैव नरोत्तमं देवीं सरस्वतीं व्यासं ततो जयमुदीरयेत्. So last time we looked at Khandava Daha, so burning of Khandava forest. So how Arjuna and Krishna protected the forest from all the obstacles they had faced, from Indra to all the other Rakshasas, Danavas, everyone, and how they protected while Agni burnt that forest and consumed it entirely, with the exception of Ashwasena, who is Takshaka's son, escaping, Maya, a Danava, because Arjuna promised him, and the birds, Shangika birds. Exception of those, everything got burnt. So we learned about that, and we said we closed the chapter, Khandavadaha chapter, saying, okay, Krishna, Arjuna, and Maya Dhanava, they sat on the river banks and were just recollecting all the things that happened in that entire process. So that's where we stopped, and that completed actually the Adi Parva, the first chapter of Mahabharata was completed. And if you remember, I said there are 18 chapters in Mahabharata, and Adi Parva had all these sub-chapters. Parva Sangraha, which is the summary introduction of all the Parvas, what it is in, Pausha Parva, Puloma, Astika, Adivansha, Vatarana, Sambhava, Jatagriha, Hidambavada, Bhakavada, Chitraratha Parva, Swayamvara Parva, Vaivahika, Vidaragamana, Rajyalabha, Arjuna Vanavasa, Sobhadra Harana, Harana, and then finally Khandavada. So all these sub chapters were there in Adi Parva. So today let's just recap all these chapters, and then we will resume with the next Mahaparva in the after summer holidays. Okay, so I will stop. I will ask questions in between just to see who remembers. Please unmute and answer. Okay, you don't have to raise hand. You can unmute and answer if I ask any questions. So we started Mahabharata by Ugrashravashauti, Suta Mahamuni, arriving at Naimisha forest, and he says that he is arriving after witnessing what Vaishampayana told at Janameja's snake sacrifice, the Sarpa Satra. Sarpa is snake, sacrifice is Satra. So in that rituals, Sarpa Satra, snake sacrifice, Vaishampayana narrated what he heard from Vaishampayana. After hearing all that, he has come, and he says that Bharata was narrated by Vaishampayana there, and Naimisha forest, Shaunaka and other munis, they ask, tell us more about this. Then Suta Mahamuni explains that Vyasa, after dividing the Vedas into 4 Vedas, then he had an idea. He had an idea that these Vedas are only for Dvijas, Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Shudra can learn, but he wanted to consolidate all the meaning of that, so that the normal people can understand. So he goes to Brahma. He says, tells Brahma that I have an idea, and that idea is, it's a something, a story which is the real story, a history I want to write, which is going to happen in future. I want to write that, and it's going to have all the mystery of the Vedas, all the rituals of Upanishads, compilation of all the Puranas. It includes the birth, decay, death, fear, disease, existence, what exists, what doesn't exist, different stages of life, different rules of 4 varnas, that is Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Shudra, what's their rules. It explains all about asceticism. It explains everything about Brahmacharya, the religious student. It explains the dimension of earth, sun, moon, all the constellations, the stars, planets, all these things, time, durations, yugas. It also explains the birth of celestials, devas and Gandharvas and all those things. It explains the birth of humans. It explains the places, regions, the pilgrimage sites, holy rivers, the mountains, forests, oceans, cities. It explains the art of whether it is all types of arts, including war, art of war. And it explains the language, culture, tradition, customs, everything. So whatever you can think, this story includes everything, all of that. Whatever the scenario one can think, it includes everything. So I have such an idea. Please help me write this. Okay. So Vyasa asks Brahma, and then Brahma says, go and seek somebody's help. Whom did Brahma say? Whom did Brahma ask?
Ganesha.
Good. So he asked Vyasa to seek Ganesha's help, and Vyasa went there and he asked Ganesha's help. They make a pact, they make an agreement that Vyasa says, Ganesha says, I will write this as long as you don't stop narrating it. And Vyasa says, I will keep on narrating as long as you understand before you write it. So that's why, so they both agree to that, and Vyasa narrates and Ganesha writes it. So total there were 18 parvas, 18 chapters in this Mahabharata. Originally it was of 24,000 verses, and then Vyasa then expanded it to 100,000 verses, that's 6 million. So out of that, half of it was narrated to Devas by Narada. Another 1,500,000 was narrated to Pitrus by Devala, and another 1,400,000 narrated to Gandharvas by Shuka. Shuka is Vyasa's son. And then 100,000 remained for the humans, Manavas, and that was narrated by Vaishampayana. So in this chapter, the first one, Parva Sangraha, again, Sutta Mahamuni briefly explains the plot. What's the story is about? He says that there is a king called Pandu. He was cursed by a rishi, so he could not get children. Then he has children through the blessings of Devas, and then his brother Dhritarashtra had 100 sons. Draupadi was married by all the Pandu's children. They had a dice game, and then Pandavas went to forest, and then there was a war, and then Pandavas became victorious. And then at that time, Shaunaka and others ask, you said that while coming here, you went to Samanta Panchaka. Can you explain what is Samanta Panchaka is about? And then he explains the Samanta Panchaka. Samanta Panchaka is where Parashurama, after exterminating all the Kshatriyas, from that blood lakes are formed, and Pitrus were very pleased with that, and they came and said, this becomes a holy place, and anyone taking bath in this holy lake, they will be cleared of all the sins. So Samanta Panchaka, he explains the story of Parashurama exterminating the Kshatriyas. Then he explains what is Akshohini means. Akshohini is the measurement of how many warriors, how many chariots, how many horses, elephants are made up of in the warfare. So it's the strength of the numbers. So it explains that. And then he also explains about why this sacrifice started, Janamejaya's sacrifice started because of a curse by Sarama. Sarama is a dog, and Janamejaya and his brothers were performing a sacrifice in Kurukshetra, and while they were performing the sacrifice, a dog puppy arrived there, and his brothers, Janamejaya's brothers, scared that, beat that dog and abused it. And then once that was hurt, it went to his mother, Sarama. Sarama is again mother of all the dogs. And she cursed Janameja that when you least expect, some trouble will come to you. And then Janameja went looking for a Purohita, a priest for him, and he comes across Shritashrava's son called Somashrava, and who becomes his priest on a condition that Somashrava becomes priest on the condition that he will stay. Janameja has to accept whatever he says. Okay, so Janameja agrees to that. That's the first chapter, Parva Sangraha. Then we go into Paushya Parva. Paushya Parva is where we start with Daumya and his students. We learn about 3 students, Upamanyu, Aruni, and Veda. Aruni is the one who blocks the water flow because the Guru asked him to block the water flow when it was heavy raining. Upamanyu is the one who is used to eat a lot, and he lost his eyesight, and then he prayed to Ashwini Devatas, and then through them he got the eyesight back. And the last one is Veda. Again, Veda, when he became a teacher, he had a student called Utanka, and Utanka, as a Guru Dakshina, the fee to his Guru, he goes to get the earring of King Paushya's wife. So earring of Paushya's wife, Takshaka steals it, and then Utanka decides to take revenge on Takshaka, and he goes to Janameja's assembly and tells Janameja that your father Parikshita was killed by Takshaka, which Janameja was not aware, and Janameja was in shock. At that time, Shaunaka and others in Naimisha forest, they asked Suta Mahamuni again, tell us about Bhrigu, the Bhrigu race, and the next chapter starts, Puloma Parva. So in that Puloma Parva chapter, Bhrigu and others, so Suta Mahamuni explains that Bhrigu is born of Brahma, and he had a son called Chavana, and then Pramati was Chavana's son through Gritachi, and then there was a Ruru who was born of Pramati, and then Ruru marries Pramadwara, and they had son called Shunaka. So they explained that, and then we hear about Chavana's birth. Bhrigu was out of house. His wife Puloma was heavily pregnant. A Rakshasa called Puloma comes there, and he tries to kidnap Bhrigu's wife Puloma, and then Chavana was born, and Chavana, through his energy, when he was born, he burns that Rakshasa. And when Bhrigu learns about this, he curses Agni that you will become the eater of everything. So that's how Agni was cursed, and Agni started eating everything on back of. After that, before that, he used to only sacrificial offerings, the ghee and anything that's offered in the sacrifice. That's the only thing he used to eat. Then after that, he starts burning everything. Then we also hear about Ruru. Ruru was about to marry Pramadwara, and Pramadwara was killed by a snake bite, and Ruru gives half of his life and revives Pramadwara. And then Ruru starts killing every snake he comes across, and then he comes across a snake called Dundiba, and that Dundiba tells Ruru that Brahmana should never hurt anybody. And then after that, Ruru stops. That's the Puloma Parva. And then we move to one of the biggest Parvas in Adi Parva, that is called Astika Parva. Astika Parva starts with the story of a sage who did not want to marry. Anybody remember the name? Jaratkaru. So Jaratkaru did not want to marry. He was strict in his vows. He did not want to marry because he thought marriage brings all the attachment and everything. So he could not complete his rituals and rites and everything. So he did not want to marry, but he comes across his ancestors hanging on a tree. So they tell him that because he does not have children, they don't attain heaven. So Jaratkaru decides to marry reluctantly, but he says that he will marry a girl with his name, only his name. If somebody comes across his name, then only he will marry. And then he marries Vasuki's sister called Jaratkaru. Vasuki is the snake's king. And a son called Astika was born, who later stops Janameja's sacrifice. So we hear at this time the birth of the snakes. Daksha Prajapati had daughters, 50 daughters. Out of them, Vinata and Kadru were 2 of them married to, 13 of them married to Kashyapa. Out of them, Vinata and Kadru were 2. And Kadru gives birth to thousands of snakes. Vinata gives has had 2 eggs, and one of them she breaks the egg, and Aruna was born with only top of the body, nothing below waist. And then second child born was Garuda. Then Vinata becomes slave to Kadru because Kadru cheats her by coloring the the Uchchaishrava, Indra's horse, white horse, covering that with her son's tails. So she hides, and then Vinata becomes a slave, and then Garuda rescues by going and taking Amrita from Indra. He rescues Vinata from the slavery. Then we hear about ocean churning, right? So we hear about ocean churning, how Uchchaishrava was born and all these things were born. So we hear about Mandara mountain moving by Shesha, and then Shesha becoming the host, and then Vishnu coming as a tortoise and holding that mountain. And then from that churning, Uchchaishrava, the horse comes, the moon, Chandra, Lakshmi, Kaustubha, jewel, and then Airavata, the elephant, and then Kalakuta, the Visha poisons comes, and Mahadeva drinks that and becomes Nilakanta, Vishakanta. And then when Amrita came, it was taken by the Daityas and Danavas, and Vishnu comes in the form of Mohini and gets it back. But when it was distributing that Amrita, Rahu and Ketu, Rahu drinks that, and then Chandra and Surya, they inform Vishnu. And then Vishnu cuts Rahu's head, and Rahu and Ketu are Rahu becomes Rahu and Ketu. So Surya and Chandra become Surya becomes very depressed because Rahu was angry with him. And then Aruna becomes his charioteer and controls Surya's movement, right? So we hear about all that, ocean churning, then come back to the story of Janamejaya and his father. So his father's name was, Janamejaya's father's name, what is his father's name?
Parikshita.
Good. Parikshita was on a hunting trip. He was very tired. He goes to ashrama, the house of Shamika Rishi. There Shamika was meditating, and he did not look at the king, and king became very angry, and he put a dead snake on his shoulder, around neck. And Shamika's son called Shringin curses Parikshita that he will die of a snake bite in 7 days. And on the way, around 7 days, a Brahmana called Kashyapa was heading towards Hastinapura to rescue Parikshita, but that Brahmana was stopped by Takshaka and given a lot of money, and Kashyapa goes away. And on the 7th day, Parikshita was killed, right? So here, through Jaratkaru's wedding with Vasuki's sister Jaratkaru, Astika was born. And when Janamejaya starts his sacrifice, Astika comes there, he praises the king, and he enters the sacrificial place. And then just when about Takshaka was about to fall, Astika asked Janamejaya to stop the sacrifice, and sacrifice was stopped because Janamejaya made a promise that he will give a gift to that Brahmana, Astika. So, and Astika request. So that's the Astika Parva. And then we move to Adivansha Vatarana Parva. So in this Parva, again, Vyasa narrates, so Vyasa, again, we come back to Mahabharata. Shaunaka and others ask Suta Mahamuni, tell us what happened at Janamejaya's sacrifice after the sacrifice was stopped. So Janamejaya says, sacrifice was stopped, everybody assembled. Vyasa asked Vaishampana to narrate the Mahabharata, and Vaishampana gives all the views about the ancestry of Pandavas, Kauravas, how it all started and everything. And then he explains what are the benefits of listening to Mahabharata. And once that's done, he explains about Uparichara Vasu. Uparichara Vasu was Indra's friend, and he marries a girl called Girika. They had 2 children through a fish named Adrika. Uparichara Vasu's energy was consumed by that Adrika, and 2 children were born, a boy and a girl. boy is called Matsya. He became the king of Matsya kingdom. And the daughter became a fisherman's daughter, and she was known as Satyavati. Satyavati later on gives birth to Parashara through through Satyavati, through Parashara, gives birth to Krishna Dvaipayana, Vyasa. So Parashara comes on one day, and then through Parashara's blessing, Satyavati immediately gives birth to a child, and he was named Krishna Dvaipayana. Krishna is because he was dark, Dvaipayana because he was born in an island. So Vyasa, he was known as Vyasa because he devours the Vedas. And then Vaishampana explains all the main characters in Mahabharata and explains why they all came to earth, because the Rakshasas were taken in the form of Kshatriyas, and to kill all of them, including Vishnu, all of them took birth on earth. Then we go into Sambhava Parva, where we learn a lot about all the creation. Brahma, his 7 sons, the Kashyapas marrying 13 children of Daksha Prajapati, and then how Devatas were born, Daityas were born, and all those things. And then we hear about Dushyanta's story. Dushyanta on a hunting trip meeting Shakuntala and Dushyanta, Shakuntala giving birth to a son called, what's the name? Shakuntala, Dushyanta's son name? Bharata. So gives Bharata, and then finally Dushyanta forgets Shakuntala, but they go to his kingdom, and then there Dushyanta remembers finally, right? And then they marry and they live longer. And then we hear about Yayati and his son Nahusha. So Yayati marrying Devayani. At this time we hear about Brahaspati's son Kacha going to Shukra's home to learn about Mrita Sanjeevani, the mantra which is capable of reviving anything that dead. So Devayani, so Kacha learns that mantra after some time, after thousands of years of service to Shukra. And then Devayani and Sharmishta, who is Sharmishta is the Danava's king, Vrishaparvan's daughter, and Devayani is Shukracharya's daughter. So both of them marry Yayati, and Yayati has children through them. And Yayati asks all his children to take his old age, because Shukra curses Yayati of cheating Devayani, right? Having children through Sharmishta, Shukra curses of he becomes old and frail. So Yayati transfers that old age to his son Puru, and Puru becomes the next king. And Yayati, after attaining heaven, he falls back because he says that he has done all the great things and he is the greatest king ever. And because of that pride, he falls from heaven. But on his way to, while he was falling from heaven to earth, he was stopped by his grandchildren through his daughter called Madhavi. Those grandchildren, Ashtaka, Pratardhana, Shibi, and Vasumat, they rescue him and take him back to heaven again. Then we hear about Mahabhisha. Mahabhisha and Ganga were cursed by Brahma that they will take birth on earth. And also at the same time, Vasus were cursed by Vashishta for stealing Nandini. So Mahabhisha takes birth as Shantanu, and then Ganga marries him on the condition that he will not challenge her anything. And then Ganga leaves 7 children in the water. 8th one was stopped, and that 8 children becomes known as, what's the name?
Devavrata.
Very good. Very good. So it's Devavrata, and Devavrata, then after learning everything, he meets Shantanu, and then at that time, Shantanu comes across Satyavati. He wants to marry Satyavati. Devavrata makes the promise that he will never marry, and children born of Shantanu will become the king. And Devavrata at that time became known as Bhishma. Satyavati gets 2 children, Chitrangada and Vichitravirya. Chitrangada dies almost when he comes to adulthood in a war. And then Vichitravirya marries 3 princes. Vichitravirya was about to marry 3 princes from Kashi. Who are they?
Amba, Ambika, and Ambalika.
Very good. Very good. And so Amba did not marry Ambika and Ambalika. marry Vichitravirya. At that time, Vichitravirya, because of a disease, he dies, right? And he dies, and then Bhishma explains that through a Brahmana, one can have children. Okay, so that's when we hear about a story called a rishi called Dirghatamas, who was born of Brahaspati's younger brother's wife, and he was blind, and his wife neglected him and they threw him in the water. And that Dirghatamas rishi, through him, King Bali had his race extended. So Bhishma explains that story, and then Satyavati seeks her son Vyasa's help. So through Ambika, Dhritarashtra was born as blind. Through Ambalika, Pandu was born, who was very weak. And then through a maid, Vidura was born, who was very knowledgeable and calm and everything else. So, and then we learn about background to Vidura's birth. Rishi Mandavya, who was meditating. Rishi Mandavya was meditating, and then robbers leave wealth in his ashrama, in his house. King hangs him, puts him in the spike. And then Mandavya did not die. And then king realizes, and after death, Mandavya goes to Yama and asks why he was punished. And then the Yama says that he pricked a insect while he was young. And Mandavya at that time reminds that children under 14 years of age make no sin. Okay, their sins are not counted. They are not counted. Only their parents can punish them. Okay, if anything. So, and Mandavya curses Yama that he will take birth on earth, and that's how Dharmaraja takes birth as Vidura. And then we hear about Dhritarashtra marrying Gandhari, who ties her eyes because Dhritarashtra was all blind and she did not want to see anything. Kunti and Madri marry Pandu. And then we learn about Kunti's knowledge about a mantra from Durvasa, where she could have children or please anybody, any devata or anybody, and she could have children through them. And we learn about Vasusena's birth. Vasusena was born before Kunti's marriage. And Gandhari's pregnancy, she was pregnant for many years, and finally she delivers a meatball after hitting her stomach, and Vyasa makes that into 101 pieces, 100 boys and one daughter. So those were born. Here, Pandu was cursed by Rishi Kindama when he was in the forest, on a hunting trip. And because of that, he leaves the kingdom and goes to forest. And there, through Kunti's mantras, they have Yudhishthira, Bhima, Arjuna, and Nakula, Sahadeva as their children through Dharmaraja, Vayu, Indra, and Ashwins. So Madri has two twins, Nakula, Sahadeva, and the first three, Yudhishthira, Bhima, Arjuna, Kunti's children. So, and then Pandu dies in the forest. Pandavas, the 5 children with Kunti, return to Hastinapura, and there Bhima was very strong, and Duryodhana did not like it. He tried to kill him with poison, and Bhima goes to Nagaloka and becomes even stronger and comes back. And then we heard about Kripacharya's birth. Kripacharya was born of Sharadvat and a Apsara called Janapadi, and his sister Kripi marries Dronacharya. Dronacharya was born of Bharadwaja Rishi and Gritachi, an Apsara. And Dronacharya learned all the weapons and everything from Agnivesha, a Rishi, and then from Parashurama, he learned all the celestial weapons. Dronacharya had a son called Ashwatthama, and he was looking for milk, and he goes to Drupada, and Drupada insults him, saying that we are no longer friends. And Drona then comes to Hastinapura, becomes the teacher for the princes in Hastinapura, and he starts teaching them. And at that time, we also learn about Ekalavya. Ekalavya comes, and Drona asks Ekalavya's thumb as a fee. And finally, we hear about all the princes completing their study and then showing off their skills. And then Pandavas defeat Drupada in the as a Guru Dakshina, and then capture him, and Drona takes half the kingdom. After that, we hear about Jatagriha. So this is where Duryodhana sends Pandavas Dhritarashtra sends Pandavas to Varanavrat, and Vidura warns them, and Pandavas escape that fire, and they go in a hiding. So they change their dress and everything. They go in hiding, and they go in a forest. Next Parva, which is called Hidimba Vada, where they come across Hidimba, the Rakshasa called Hidimba, and his sister Hidimba likes Bhima, and Bhima marries her after killing her brother, and they had a son called Gatotkaja. After that, Pandavas go to Ekachakra Nagara. This Parva is called Bakavada Parva. Ekachakra Parva, Pandavas spend a lot of time there, and Bhima kills Bakasura, and Bakasura was killed, and after that, they head towards Drupada's kingdom, hearing that there is a Swayamvara happening. And Arjuna comes across a Gandharva called Angaraparna, and that Angaraparna was defeated by Arjuna, and from him, Arjuna gets Gandharva horses from Gandharva, and also Gandharva suggests that Daumya becomes their Purohit, and they seek Daumya's help, and Daumya agrees that. And we also learn at this time, we learn about Vashishta and Vishwamitra, how Vashishta lost his children because of Kalmashapada becoming a Rakshasa and eating all Vashishta's children. So we learn that story about Vashishta as well. And then we go to Panchala. In Panchala kingdom, Swayamvara was prepared for Draupadi. Draupadi was born of fire because Drupada wanted to take revenge. And he had sought help of Jaya Upajaya, and then because of them, so he had through fire Drashtadrimma and Draupadi were born, and Draupadi Swayamvara, Arjuna wins that Swayamvara. And then we go into Vaivahika Parva, a Parva called Vaivahika Parva, where Draupadi's previous history of 5 husbands' request, everything was narrated by Vyasa to Drupada, and Pandavas marry all the 5 Pandavas marry Draupadi. And then after that, Vidura comes in the Vidura Agamana Parva. Vidura arrives to Panchala. He takes Pandavas to Hastinapura, and Pandava were given Khandava Prastha, a desert land, by Dhritarashtra, asking them to go and rule that place. And we hear about Sunda, Upasunda, 2 Rakshasas, and how the brothers were very close to each other. And Tilottama was created by Brahma, Vishwakarma, and Tilottama became the instrument in Sunda Upasunda fighting with each other and then killing each other. So because of that, Pandavas make a rule that if anybody is with Draupadi, another one enters or disturbs, they will go to forest. So Arjuna, because of that rule, has to go to forest because he entered the room when Draupadi was with Yudhishthira. Arjuna goes on exile. He marries Ulupi, a snake Naga girl, and then he goes to Manipura and marries Chitrangada. And on his way, he goes to Dwaraka. There he meets Krishna and then looks at Subhadra. And then we go into Subhadra Harana Parva, where Arjuna abducts Subhadra, and then Arjuna marries Subhadra, and then they have children called Abhimanyu, and Draupadi had 5 children of her own through 5 husbands. Finally, we come to Khandavadaha Parva. Arjuna and Krishna go on a relaxing trip on Yamuna River. There they come across Agni. Agni asks to their help, and Arjuna gets Gandiva, bow, arrows, chariot. Krishna gets his discus and Kaumodaki Gada. And Arjuna and Krishna protect the forest. Agni burns the entire forest because he lost his appetite eating a lot of ghee from Shvetaki's sacrifice, King Shvetaki's sacrifice. Agni burns the forest for 15 days, and only Maya, Danava, Ashwasena, and Shangika birds escape that fire. So that's Khandavadaha Parva. So those are the Parvas and summary. Again, this Mahabharata, so as we said in the very beginning, Mahabharata is benefit of this is anyone who is reading this or listening to this, they will attain the world of Brahma. Okay, and this Bharata is again equal to all the Vedas, and it is worthy of listening So it includes dharma, artha, kama, all these things. That's profit, pleasure, everything, and religious rights and everything. And it is the most sacred history. So if anyone listening to it or reciting this, they will, with truthful and liberal and believing in all these things, earn much wealth. Their sins, even killing embryos in the womb, and destroyed by this listening to this. So again, hearing this history, people escape from all types of sins, and it should be, that's why this is called Jaya. Mahabharata is also called Jaya because it is victory. And it should be heard for those who desire victory in everything they do. And this Mahabharata is again is the path to listening to this is path to moksha. Those who hear it, read, have sons, servants, everybody obedient to them, and all the sins committed by body or word or even in mind, leave them immediately. Okay. So again, so this gives a lot of listening to this Mahabharata is excellent. It gives fame, it gives in long life, and it is sacred and heavenly. So it gives a lot of merit and virtue. So anyone who reads this in the 4 rainy seasons, that's called I'm starting from this August, this month here, Ashada, from 4 months to Kartika. Anyone listening to this, they will be cleansed of all the sins. Okay. And they will be equivalent to one who has read all the Vedas. So this work again includes all the rishis, sages, and Krishna, Shiva, Parvati, Skanda, everybody, all the greatness, all the Brahmanas, cows, and all the great things. So again, listening to Mahabharata is great, as Vaishampana and Vyasa narrated. So you all spent last 6 months or so joining the classes and listening to this Mahabharata. Hope you all benefited. We got another couple of minutes before we close. Anybody have any views? Should we continue this session